Welcome to this video on international law and jurisdiction, where we navigate the complexities of the global legal landscape. A foundational principle states that a legal force cannot create legal authority. Sovereignty and jurisdiction derive from lawful control of territory. An invading state cannot impose its domestic criminal law on an invaded population because it obtains control through unlawful force. This principle is embedded in the UN Charter's prohibition on aggressive war, the Nuremberg Judgment, and the Stimson Doctrine. These collectively establish that an unlawful occupier cannot claim sovereign jurisdiction. An invading state lacks any recognized basis of criminal jurisdiction. International law only recognizes 5 bases for jurisdiction. These 5 bases are territoriality, nationality, passive personality, protective principle, and universal jurisdiction. None of these apply to an invading state attempting to impose its criminal law on an occupied population. The Geneva Conventions, specifically Article 64 of Convention IV, prohibit imposing domestic criminal law on occupied populations. The occupying power must respect existing laws and can only enact new penal laws when strictly necessary for security. The Nuremberg precedent rejected Nazi Germany's attempt to apply its domestic laws in occupied territories. Occupation does not confer sovereignty. Aggressors cannot benefit from their own wrongdoing, encapsulated in the maxim, ex injuria jus non oritur. The ICTY and ICTR confirmed that war crimes must be defined by international humanitarian law, not unilateral domestic statutes. Occupying powers are bound by international law, not their own criminal codes. Key cases, including Prosecutor versus Tadic, Kordic and Cerquez, and Akayesu, confirm the primacy of international humanitarian law. They emphasize that war crimes derive from international norms, and domestic law cannot redefine them. An invading state has no territorial jurisdiction because sovereignty cannot be acquired through unlawful aggression. The territoriality principle does not apply to an unlawful occupier, as a legal force cannot create lawful authority. The Tadic case established the primacy of international humanitarian law over domestic laws. It affirmed that war crimes are defined by international norms and rejected the application of national criminal codes to international crimes. International law recognizes 5 bases of jurisdiction: territoriality, nationality, protective principle, passive personality, and universality. Each governs a specific legal nexus for applying criminal law. Occupying powers cannot unilaterally redefine international crimes. War crimes must be strictly defined by international humanitarian law. Domestic criminal law cannot be applied arbitrarily to foreign nationals. Sovereignty is not acquired through illegal aggressive force. Therefore, the territoriality principle does not apply to an unlawful occupier, meaning the invading state lacks a recognized basis for criminal jurisdiction. The Kordic case confirmed that war crimes stem from international norms. It rejected the unilateral application of domestic law by an aggressor and highlighted the primacy of international humanitarian law. War crimes must strictly derive from international norms. Domestic law cannot unilaterally redefine international war crimes, and the application of an aggressor state's domestic law is rejected. The Akayesu case confirmed that domestic law is irrelevant for redefining international crimes. International crimes are strictly defined by international legal norms, limiting the application of national criminal codes. Domestic law cannot redefine established international crimes. The Akayesu case affirmed limits on national criminal codes and emphasized the primacy of international humanitarian law. The Tadic jurisdiction principles confirm the primacy of international humanitarian law. They reject national criminal codes for prosecuting international crimes and establish principles for international tribunal jurisdiction. In recap, illegal force cannot create legitimate criminal jurisdiction. Occupying powers are bound by international humanitarian law, and domestic laws of the aggressor state cannot apply. War crimes must be defined by established international norms. An occupying power cannot impose its domestic criminal code, even laws related to terrorism. The Geneva Conventions limit the legislative power of an occupier, preventing aggressors from prosecuting occupied peoples under their domestic law. The occupier lacks standing because illegal force cannot create legitimate criminal jurisdiction. An invading state lacks any recognized basis for jurisdiction and cannot apply its own domestic criminal laws. The Geneva Conventions restrict military necessity claims. Necessity must be strictly for security and order, proportional and temporary. This principle does not allow for imposing domestic criminal law on the occupied population. The Jursidiction case reaffirms that war crimes must strictly derive from international norms. It rejects the application of an aggressor state's domestic law and confirms the primacy of international humanitarian law. Once more, Jursidiction emphasizes that war crimes must strictly derive from international norms. Domestic law cannot unilaterally redefine international crimes, and the aggressor state's domestic law is rejected. The occupier's domestic terrorism law violates international humanitarian law. Geneva Convention IV prohibits imposing the aggressor's domestic criminal code, confirming the lack of a recognized basis for criminal jurisdiction. To recap on illegitimate jurisdiction, illegal force prevents its establishment. Occupying powers must comply with international humanitarian law. Aggressor domestic laws cannot apply, and war crimes are defined by international norms only. Occupier states cannot apply penal laws retroactively, as Geneva Convention IV prohibits ex post facto laws. Retroactive application violates fundamental principles of justice, and existing penal laws must be respected. The invader lacks jurisdiction because illegal force cannot create legitimate criminal authority. An invading state lacks a recognized basis for jurisdiction, and domestic laws of the aggressor state cannot be applied. For instance, a state cannot apply its domestic law in occupied territory. Sovereignty is not acquired through illegal force, and the Geneva Conventions prohibit imposing an aggressor's criminal code. The sovereignty of the occupied territory confirms its legitimate criminal jurisdiction. Aggressor states cannot legally impose their domestic criminal laws, and international law invalidates prosecutions by the invading power. In conclusion, an invading state cannot prosecute nationals of the invaded state under its domestic law. This is because it lacks sovereignty and jurisdiction, international law prohibits such imposition, and historical precedent rejects these claims. Such prosecutions are void under international law. Thank you for watching this video on international law and jurisdiction.